Hello again, and you can call me Lily. And this is the second part in painting with watercolor or watercolor basics in Clipstudio. In the first part, I discussed the basics of painting watercolor and the brushes that I'm using throughout this series. In this part, I will discuss tips on painting skin with watercolor. Now, skin can be very tricky because in other mediums or in other types of brushes, you have to use multiple colors in order to get skin to look natural. But skin in watercolor is not that difficult at all. First of all, you do not need a lot of colors to make skin look natural. I have found you can use one, two, or a few. And also, you do not need to start off with midtones and shadows. You always start light, then work your way dark. And as you can see, in this is the tan skin, and it's rather desaturated color palette that I'll be using. First, we're starting off with the tan skin with the wet wash brush. Now, I am doing this on multiple layers. I start off light, and this is on its own layer. Then I go in with the midtones in their own layer. Then I do the shadows, which is on its own layer. I'm not using a blender, and no, I'm using multiple colors, but you can see it does not really show that well on the wet wash. It just looks like one color, right? And also note, if you're adding blush or warmth to the skin at the end, you might want to use a very saturated bold color like I'm doing here, so it can show well if you're using the wet wash. Then next, I'm going to the dark skin to show you that you can get a natural looking skin color with one skin tone. Again, I'm using wet wash, and I'm doing this all on one layer. I'm starting again light, then I'm working my way to the midtones, then to the shadows. I'm not using a blender yet to paint the skin here. With the second one, I did use the triangle blender to blend it to show you how smooth it can look if you do use a blender. And also, I'm just adding a little bit of white with the flat brush to show you how other brushes look when adding with watercolor, and I'm blending it. Notice when I try to add texture on the smooth side, it's easy to see, but on the wet wash side, you can't really see it. So then finally, I'm doing pale skin, and I'm doing this with the watercolor marker. Now I'm starting off with one color as well, and this is to show you how it looks like with the watercolor marker and how it also looks like also on one layer. Now I prefer to do things on one layer, but you don't have to when it comes to skin. You can just merge it later on. And as usual, we're going from light to dark, and I'm not using a blender at this time. I'm just using the watercolor marker. Now with the watercolor marker, it mimics more, of course, of a dry watercolor look. And with watercolor markers or watercolor brushes that are not wet wash, they give you more of an intense color than the wet washes do, which is to be expected. Now with this one, I am again still using the watercolor marker and still doing pale skin, but I am doing it with multiple colors instead of one color. And again, this is on one layer, but as I said, this is a preference. You can just merge the layers afterwards and then blend them if you like. So again, as usual, nothing has changed. I'm starting with light, and then I'm going to midtones, and then I'm going to be going with the shadows. And as usual, I will not be using a blender at this point. It is the brush itself that is blending. Now, if you think that the texture is getting a little too smooth for you, you can always again add a watercolor or some type of textured paper at the end or in the beginning if you like. So the final thing that I'm doing is adding texture to the skins. And on the left hand side, we have not blended. On the right hand side, we have blended. Remember that texture shows itself through the midtones of an object, not the highlights, not the shadows, but through the midtones. And I'm using the Clipstudio sprinkle or scattered airbrush that's built into it to just add some freckles. So these are our skin balls. We have the pale being not blended, the tan wet wash, and then the blended dark skin. See you in the next video. Thank you. Ciao.